Hello, and welcome to the second annual Veterans Speak, hosted by the Bay College Civics Corps in partnership with the American Legion of the Upper Peninsula, the American Merchant Marine Veterans, Great Lakes Peace Center, and Waging Dialogue. I'm Sam Combs, and tonight's event will be co-hosted by my Civics Corps peers, Alexis Hall, Caitlin Horschner, Chloe Pokovich, and Mark Wickman. The Civics Corps is a student club that serves the community through the promotion of generationally based conversations. Through this work, we gain nonpartisan professional skills as we practice forms of historic memory dialogue. Anchoring discussions to the past means that our panelists will be telling stories from their individual lived experiences. Please keep in mind that several of our panelists served during a wartime and will be sharing based off those experiences. Please also note that people of different generations may use different words or phrases tied to when and where they grew up and the types of experiences they've had. We ask that participants offer respect and tolerance for generational differences in self-expression. The views of panelists and audience members do not necessarily reflect that of the Civics Corps, affiliated individuals, or Bay College. This event is being recorded. Participation grants the Civics Corps and its partners unrestricted use for promotional and educational purposes. Before we get started into the program, Ms. Deb Nedow of the Great Lakes Peace Center will read our land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. I am just honored to be here, and this is such an important event. Dialogue is always essential for peace building. My team member, Molly Larson, has volunteered to read tonight because I have a cold and I don't want to cough through an important land acknowledgement. So, Molly?
We begin this gathering by collectively acknowledging that we reside and work on the traditional lands served by the 12 tribes of Michigan. Badenoch Community College occupies the traditional lands of the Nakne Indians who once lived along the shores and gave the beautiful Badenoch its name. Badenoch Community College also occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, the Three Fires Confederacy of the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. The Hanaville Potawatomi are descendants of those who refused to leave Michigan in 1834 during the Great Indian Removal. By offering this land acknowledgement, we respect those ancestral grounds, honor America's first people, and celebrate the resilience and strength of all Indigenous people have shown the world wide. Miigwech.
Thanks, Ms. Nedow and Ms. Larson. It is now my pleasure to introduce to all of you tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Dave Yoho. Mr. Yoho enlisted in the U.S. Maritime Service during World War II, where he served as an engine crewman in the South Pacific until the war's end in 1945. Since then, Mr. Yoho has been an avid supporter of veterans' rights. He has had a successful career in business and has made thousands of speeches across the United States and foreign countries. He has been awarded the Oscar of Public Speaking and the Master of Influence Award. Dunn's Business Report has called him the superstar of motivation and training. Mr. Yoho has also written numerous books, including 2 bestsellers, has been invited to the White House multiple times, and attended this year's National Veterans Day celebration in Washington, D.C. In 2022, Mr. Yoho received the Congressional Gold Medal of Valor for World War II. Thank you so much for your service and for joining us, Mr. Yoho.
Thank you for the elaborate introduction. At least 50% of it is true. Just a little levity there. And I appreciate being invited to such a collegial group here. And I trust that my remarks will befit what you want to know about us being members of the World War II constituency. So when World War II started, the World War II in the United States, I was 13 years of age on December 7th, 1941. We had 130 million people in the United States, and I was but one of them. We put 16 million in uniform, and I was also one of those. Now, I didn't go in at 13, but as the war progressed, after we put 16 million in uniform, we had fewer and fewer people to send into the military. Now, the Merchant Marines, of which I enlisted in the United States Maritime Service, was really founded in about 1938 by President Roosevelt. And as such, it was a civilian occupation. The Merchant Marines having existed since the Revolutionary War. So how do I get involved in this fracas? Well, at the age of 15, I was a junior in high school and had a great penchant to go away. If there was a time in my genre, there was a time of great patriotism, and young men wanted to enlist. The day after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the lines went around blocks of men enlisting in the Army and the Navy and the Marines and what have you. And then there was a peculiar branch of the service that I joined only because at 15 I tried to enlist in the Navy. I was successful until they found out I had a falsified birth certificate. So then I turned my view towards an easier mark, and it turned out to be the United States Maritime Service. Now, we were trained in military formats. I went to Sheepshead Bay, New York, of which there were 3 enlisted men training stations in the United States. One was in California, one was in New York, and one was in Florida. And then we had an officers training which exists today in Kings Point, New York. And so if people ask me, if you went in at 15, why? Well, because times were a lot different. We had just coming out of a horrible, horrible depression, and life was not all that good for lower middle class people, of which I was one. But I was one of many who decided we wanted to be part of the action. So I snuck in there at 15. By the time I went to training camp, I was all of 16, and I spent the majority of my wartime experience at the age of 16. And I was interviewed once on the United Nations program, and somebody said to me, "Did you think that you might have made a mistake going into the service at that age?" I said, "Yes." They said, "When did you realize it?" And I said, "The day I got there," because it's instantaneous. You go from being a teen to instant adulthood, just like that, the clap of my hands. We became adults. You're expected to do what adults do. You're being trained to fulfill a man's spot. And so that's the way we were training. It took about 8 weeks of training because I decided that I wanted to be in the engine room. Also a mistake. But I decided that that's where I wanted to be. I'd never been on a ship, never seen the ocean. I shouldn't say that. I think I saw it once when I was a very little child, but I was one of many who were in that general area. I was, when I went in at 16, I probably weighed, let's say, 165, 170 pounds. And I was probably at the time 5'7" or 5'8". And in 1 year when I came out, I weighed 212 pounds and I was almost 6 foot tall. Now, life in a military environment is not like life anywhere else. Even though I was on a ship that had both merchant mariners and Navy gunmen. And we went on that ship, and then we were required to be the second position, meaning if one of the guys in the gun crew got taken down, we had to be in there. So here I was on a ship. I went eight or 9 weeks in preparation. Now I'm on a ship, having to perform a task. And we hadn't gone too far. I took a ship that was on the Atlantic Ocean that eventually took me down and through the canal and into the Pacific. I was on something called a fleet oiler, which was a new kind of ship at the time. It was a W2, World Shipping Administration ship, and it was a T2 tanker. Big deal at that time. It held what was equivalent to 98,000 barrels. Now, there wasn't in barrels. That's how they measured. I was on that ship. And we refueled other ships. And so in the course of doing those things, a lot of strange experience. The first being when we were not too far at sea, they set off gunnery practice. Now, I'm in the engine room. I'm down low in that ship. The ship sits very low in the water. I was probably 35 to 40 feet below the waterline where my position was in that ship, and they started gunnery practice, which was very exciting because on the ship, if you ever see a ship, they have something that turns like this on the ship's main deck. They're called cowls, COWLS, and they take in the air, but they take in all the noise. And strangely enough, it's magnified when it comes down to the engine room. And the first time I was on duty down there when those guns went off, it blew my mind because it felt like World War II was right in the belly of that ship. And so I said to an older guy, he was probably 21 or 22, but he was an officer. I said, if we take a hit, what's the best way to get out of here? And he turned to me and he said, kid, he was 22, so I was 60, kid, if we take a hit, you don't get out. Now that's the reality of war. The truth is that we form a companionship, those of us who have served in times like that. And it's a bit surreal in many ways, because if you have relatives who have been in the war, they don't like to talk about their personal experience. It isn't the greatest thing to talk about because it brings in some unkind memories. The World War II Merchant Marines, of which I served after being trained by the United States Maritime Service, had the highest mortality rate. 1 out of 26 of us died. Almost horrendous number beyond that came home with physical and mental deficiencies, not the least of which is something called post-traumatic stress. So from this body of work that I've just given you now is my involvement. And there's a serious thing to look at. We lost 440,000 total members. And now we survived, and there will be some other people on here, I'm sure, that will tell you their experience. And we are a rapidly declining number. I had a great experience after the war that put me in a position to be able to do what I do, live the way I would like to do. If I had to do over, I probably wouldn't change it. But when I came home after enlisting at 15, I didn't have a high school education. And I worried a little bit about it, and I couldn't get a job because jobs were not that easy, and they wouldn't hire somebody that didn't have a high school education. But fortunately, along came the GED. I have a generally equivalent diploma from high school. And then I immediately got on a trolley car and went over to Temple University, enrolled, and did a nighttime course to get my undergraduate degree. So life has been very good to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. And hopefully I have at least titillated you sufficiently that you may want to ask a question, all of which I will answer except those dealing with my age or virility. But other than that, everything is open game. I hope you satisfied my purpose in being here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Yoho, for your speech. To get started with our dialogue, we'll do a short round of introductions of today's panelists. Panelists, please wave to the audience as we introduce you. From the elder generations, we have Captain Hugh Stevens and Burley Smith. Captain Hugh Stevens served in the Det Department in World War II, surviving combat situations against enemy U-boats. He is one of the last surviving World War II mariners who experienced action at sea. Captain Stevens continued to serve for many years before becoming a maritime instructor. Burley Smith is the last surviving crew member of the SS Meredith Victory during the Korean War Hungnam evacuation. The Meredith Victory transported 14,000 refugees as enemy forces surrounded the port of Hungnam. This was the largest humanitarian rescue ever by ship.
Next, we have the baby boom generation. We have Jan Lipinski. She was an Army nurse during the Vietnam War, which led to her career in the medical field. She currently serves as the Upper Peninsula Membership Director for the nonpartisan American Legion Department of Michigan.
From Gen X, we have Chris Cooper and Captain Sherry Hickman. Chris Cooper served for 2 years in the Navy as a pattern maker on a repair ship, leaving with the rank of E3. He originally signed up for the Army, but switched to the Navy for a better career position. Captain Sherry Hickman is a U.S. Merchant Marine ship pilot. She is a pioneer in being among a handful of women to be the first generation of female ship pilots, which is considered the highest attainable position in the Merchant Marine.
From the millennial generation, we have Brendan Templeton and David Bosma. Brendan Templeton served in the Army National Guard for 8 years, leaving with a rank of E4. Like many, he entered the Guard to build a better future. And David Bosma also served in the National Guard for 10 years in 91 Bravo, leaving with the rank of E5. He joined the military at his grandfather's request and became a wheel mechanic serving in Afghanistan in the early 2000s.
It is an honor to have this distinguished panel of veterans with us tonight. Before we continue, I'd like to review some guidelines for the event with everyone. 1, we will be asking the panelists a series of questions. Please feel free to speak as you're comfortable. Don't worry if you cannot recall specific memories or if your examples are not an exact match to the prompt. 2, we ask that everyone be mindful of the time to allow others to share space. Per question, we ask the panelists to keep their answers to about 3 to 4 minutes, as we want time to allow for reflection and discussion. 3, we ask everyone to avoid interruptions or side conversations. Please remain muted if not speaking. 4, differences of opinions are respected. Kindness and compassion are our goals as we listen and honor the diversity and equality of all are here today. And then after the panel discussion, we'll host a Q&A session. However, for the sake of time, we will not use the Zoom type chat, but rather take direct questions. Please use the raise hand feature of Zoom, and as time allows, we'll try to take your questions. Please keep your questions brief, respectful, and tied to the panelists' memories. Anyone attempting to disrupt or politicize the event from its focus will be removed. We thank everyone for their cooperation and for attending. Now let's begin our discussion.
All right, for our first question, tell us the story about when you started your service career and why. Whoever would like to go first, maybe.
My pilot just corrected me. The draft was right behind me, and I had just failed the West Point entrance exam, so I was anxious to serve someplace where I'd be able to go from the bottom to the top. And I discovered that was possible in the Merchant Marine. So like Mr. Yoho, I began at Sheepshead Bay, spent 3 months there, and then suddenly found myself in the first All-American convoy going to Britain.
All right, should I?
And just so the American Legion doesn't feel left out, right? Post 6 in Hollowell, Maine. I defer to others.
Thank you, sir, for being a member of the American Legion, and thank you for your service, both of you that have spoken so far. I decided fairly early on that I was going to be a nurse, like about the age of 8. And both of my parents served in World War II. My father was a Signal Corps in England and then Greenland, and my mom was a Navy nurse. And so it was kind of expected that I go in the military. It just was what was done. And so I became an Army nurse. That way I made them both happy. Father for the Army, mother for the Nurse Corps. And they actually paid for my nursing school. My last 2.5 years of nursing school, I was on scholarship. And then I owed them 3 years, and I graduated from college in 73 and went on active duty of March of 74. And actually I told them I wanted to go anywhere but Indianapolis, Indiana, because I was from Dayton, Ohio. So where did they see fit to send me? Indianapolis, Indiana, 90 miles from home. But then the fall of Saigon happened. And one doctor and one nurse from our hospital went TAD to the fall of Saigon. And I was the nurse. And let me tell you, that was an experience. We were based in Guam. We flew in with the Air Force every day into Benoit. The choppers would come from Vung Tau, pick us up. And then I was one of the few nurses who actually went downtown, because what you can't tell is I'm 6'1". And back then I could bench press about 250. So they figured I was as strong as one of the guys. So I went in town with our 91 Bravos and our 91 Charlies, who were our corpsmen, and in a helicopter in Hueys, and we were lifting them off rooftops and anywhere else we could lift them in, bringing them back to Benoit. Air Force would load them on the choppers, and we'd take them back to Guam. We'd unload them in Guam, and then we'd take care of them for the next, the rest of their stay. We worked 16-hour shifts. I think I had one day off in the first month I was there, and met my fellow comrades, my fellow service members will tell you that's real common. There are no days off in war. That's a little bit of my story at this point.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to all the other veterans here for your service. My name's David Bosma. I grew up on a horse rescue farm. Come from a long line of military members, and I grew up playing Army in the backyard, so it was just something I was always meant to do. After high school, I wasn't doing nothing, and Grandpa said it was time, so I went down and signed up. Served 10 years, joined in 2009 all the way to 2019. My MOS was an 91 Bravo, which is an all-wheel mechanic. One tour to Afghanistan and a few tours to a couple other countries.
I enlisted right before the housing crash in out in California, like a year before that actually happened and made world news. I just totaled the car, and I was at a job fair, and I ran into a recruiter, and he offered me the adventure of a lifetime. So I took him up on the offer, and yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up enlisting, and it kept me off the streets out in Sacramento. So pretty sure it saved my life for a while anyway. Yeah, that's just how it went for me. That's all I have.
I'm Chris. Was going to join the Army with a friend of mine, and we were going in on the buddy system, and he unfortunately couldn't join the Army for some medical conditions. So at any rate, I had gotten kicked out of my house. I had no intention of going to school because I was not a good student, and the Army was what I thought was going to be a good choice for me. I was at MEPS, where you go down to get sworn in and that in your physicals, and I ran into a Navy recruiter, and the Navy recruiter pitched me on this job, which was a pattern maker and would be a skill set for me once I got out of the military to be able to use in the civilian world. It made sense to me. And so we made the change down there. And 2 weeks later, I was off to boot camp. And then there was an A school, they call it, which is like a tech school to teach you your job. And then I got on a ship called the USS Samuel Gompers, 8037. It was a destroyer tender, and it was essentially a repair ship. So my job as a pattern maker, it's not very glamorous or anything, but we would get casted pieces of metal that would be broken. They would bring it to us in our shop. We would make a mechanical drawing of it, and then actually make that particular piece of metal, whatever it ended up being, for the foundry. And so we would send those patterns down to the foundry, and they would ram that up and forge those steel pieces. We did a little bit of that, but it was a lot more like carpentry stuff and things like that. And that was my time, and that's kind of my story and how I got into the military.
This is Burley Smith down in Miami. One of my neighbors came back this morning from the Upper Peninsula, and he said it was 20 degrees over the weekend. Any of you who are living up there now, it's probably in the mid 70s here in Miami at the moment. So you have my sympathies. I graduated from Atlantic City High School in 1946, right at the end of the war, and couldn't afford to go to Rutgers, where those of my classmates who were going to college ended up. And my dad had been an ordinary seaman all during the war on Liberty ships, convoys to the Mediterranean and to Murmansk. So I knew about Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy. And I took the entrance exam in April of 1946, just before I got out of high school, and managed to pass, got in. And in those days, we had a basic school, as Dave Yoho will probably remember, out in San Mateo, California. Very pleasant. You spent a year out there and then a year at sea as a cadet on merchant ships. My first ship was a 6-month round the world American President Line freighter, one cadet for the deck and one cadet for the engine department. And the 3-month trip, because of the mess that the world had been left in after the war, the ports all damaged, blown up, it took us 6 months to do what was normally a 3-month trip. But it was a remarkable experience to get to see the world at that point in time. Find yourself in Tokyo wandering the streets where most of the men were still wearing cast-off Japanese army uniforms, and you'd be the only Anglo within sight. It was sort of a scary experience, but tremendous experience. That sea year in the Merchant Marine Academy for young people is a very leveling and very entertaining sort of experience. After a year at sea, we did 2 years back at Kings Point and came out with our bachelor's degrees. I was a deckhand. Unlike Dave, I didn't want to go into the engine room. My classmates, 2 of them on the Merit of the Victory in Korea, 1950, were in the engine department. And when people would talk to us after we got back, both of them would say, gee, we don't know really what was going on up on top. We were down in the engine room. So the deck cadets got to see everything. And we came out as third mates, which was my job in Korea on the Merit of the Victory. After 6 months out there, incidentally, that lifting of the 14,000 Korean refugees, they were all enemy refugees who had fled from North Korea with the Marines who had been beaten back from the Chosin Reservoir when MacArthur tried to take them all the way up to China, to the Chinese border. And we ended up having 5 babies born on the ship during the 4 days that we had these 14,000 poor refugees on board. They were people fleeing ahead of the Chinese troops and the North Korean troops that were beating our own forces back down into the south. And one of the one of the refugees, a girl, a very 20-year-old, had a baby a year or two after we got down to the south of Korea with all these refugees. And her son became President Moon of Korea later on. And the Koreans are very much inclined to be terribly nice to all Americans who were involved in the Korean campaign, as those of you who've been out there probably know. And her son became president of the republic and has invited us out several times. And when you go out there, you're always treated extremely nicely by the government and the people involved. I sailed after Korea with the McCormick line to Scandinavia and to Brazil, a lot more pleasant than our 6 months in Korea. Decided one day in Copenhagen, we were discharging mail from New York for Denmark. And it was freezing cold. It was January. And as we were lifting the mail bags off the cold steel deck in the upper tween decks of number 3 hatch, they uncovered a nest of little pink rats. And the little rats have no fur, I learned. And I thought to myself at that point, maybe this isn't the career I want to spend the rest of my life doing. So that afternoon, I wrote to the Harvard Business School in Boston. And I said, if you've got any room, I think I'd like to come back and do an MBA. And about 3 months later, through my mother in Long Island, I got a letter back from Harvard saying, well, come and join us. And I ended up going in, leaving Mormac, going to Boston to the business school. And after a year there, the Navy got me. Now, I had never intended to go into the military. Even though we came out of Kings Point with ensigns commissions in the Naval Reserve. So when the Navy said, we'd like you to come in, what sort of duty would you like? I thought, why, this is very, very pleasant, very polite of them. My roommate at Harvard was a classmate of mine from Kings Point, and he was a lot brighter than I was. And he said, whatever you ask for, whatever kind of duty you request, they're going to give you the exact opposite. And he said, I would like shore duty in Europe. So I'm going to ask for a destroyer out of Norfolk. And I thought, well, gosh, I'll play it straight and I'll ask for a shore duty in Europe, which I did. A couple of weeks later, we got our assignments. He got the destroyer out of Norfolk and I got the admiral's staff in London for 2 years, which was extremely pleasant duty, just meeting naval ships and merchant marine ships on charter to the Navy. Ended up marrying a British girl and had 2 very pleasant years in England. After that, I came back, finished at the business school, which was a 2-year course. Went with the old Grace line, which used to run from New York down to the west coast of South America and the Caribbean, and worked as a 3rd mate with them. And then in their offices, ended up being manager of the Cartagena office down in Colombia. And then after about 2 years down there in Colombia, which I enjoyed very much, I had an offer to go to England as manager of an American steamship company called States Marine Line, which did a lot of American military goods from the east coast of the US over to North Germany and to the UK. So I spent 2 years with them. And then when they wanted to send me to Tokyo, I decided that it was time I started my own company. So I started a little outfit called International Marine Management in London and had no income at all for the first 6 months. By this time I was divorced, had 2 children, and I was wondering if I made the right decision. And finally got a job from one of my classmates from Kings Point, who was living out in Greece, running a very successful small freight company with freighters. And that was the start of what was a very interesting company. I built it up, became the distribution agent for the US Air Force in England. All the food supplies and medical supplies for the Air Force were coming in from the US through the little port of Felixstowe in Suffolk up north of London. And I bid and got the contract to distribute all these containers from Felixstowe to the 5 US bases, Air Force bases in the UK. And after about 4 or 5 years, I sold my interest in that company and moved back to the States, where I started a feeder company running from Miami down to the Caribbean, small roll-on, roll-off ships to Jamaica and the Cayman Islands and that sort of area. But I found out that Kings Point, and I would recommend to any young high school person who doesn't know where they're going, that nothing could beat the schools which train ships officers, the 5 state schools in the United States, the Kings Point, of course. It's a marvelous education. It's paid for. You don't have to pay these exorbitant college fees nowadays. And you can go on to schools like Harvard or wherever in the world you want to go if that's what your aim is. So for me, the Merchant Marine and the Navy have been a great career.
Can everybody hear me okay? Well, I think I might disappoint some Kings Pointers here. At the age of 12, I knew I wanted to go to sea and be a sea captain. So I explored my avenues and found that I wanted to attend Maine Maritime Academy, located in Castine, Maine. So I graduated from there in 1985, went to sea at the end of 1985 for 2 years with a company called Marine Transport Lines, which happened to be chartered by Military Sealift Command. So we did a lot of training and fueling underway with some Navy ships. And then I moved on to a company called Keystone Shipping. I'd moved up to second mate while I was with Marine Transport Lines. Then I sailed with Keystone Shipping Company out of their headquarters was in Philadelphia, and I sailed with them for 7 years, where I worked my way up to master and sailed on an oil tanker called the Coronado. And in my 7th year there, I'd had applied to the Baltimore pilots, which they hired me. And I applied to the Houston pilots and they hired me, and I really wanted to be a Houston pilot. So I have been a Houston pilot now for 29 years. I was the first female captain with Keystone, and I was the first female pilot after 73 years of operation on the Houston Ship Channel without any females. We now have 4 out of 97, but we're making way. So I didn't even realize there was a pilot when I wanted to go to sea and become a captain, and obviously learned about pilots while I was at the academy on our cadet cruises. So that's I'm still piloting, probably will for a few more years.
From your time in the service, what skills did you learn that helped you in life?
Well, first of all, I'd like to add what I said in the opening remarks. It's an instant maturation. I was on a ship that had a crew of about 60, 65, and 35 of them were Navy. But we refueled other ships. And it's an interesting phenomenon because when you're in a combat zone, the ships cannot stop. But we're like a gas station at sea. So the ships had to be steered parallel to each other at slow nottage for the refueling. So that's a knowledge that I don't ever intend to use in my life. That's not what I wanted to do. But it gave me an automatic, heartwarming feeling about my country. I love this country. I love my flag. I love all the things that happen. I don't know that if I had the opportunity to do anything else in my life, I would do that. But here it gives you an opportunity. What some of you gentlemen spoke about is the opportunity to go to school. I had the opportunity to go to school. My parents never owned a home. I lived in the inner city. The rent was $11 a month when we could afford to pay it. Loaf of bread was 10 cents. A quart of milk was 11 cents. And from that environment, there was an enriching thing that came in post-World War II, despite what I went through. I'm happy for my GED. I went to a Jewish school to get an undergraduate degree. But now the learning experience that you got at 16 and 18 is not like the learning experience you get when you go to high school. So when I came home, I had none of those things. And so my learning experience is when you do something like this, make sure you're up to the commitment you make and then be prepared for what happens, because the aftermath of war, veterans in all the stations of life, despite gender, despite being a nurse or a WASP or a RAC, veterans are not treated. People come up and say, I thank you for your service, but here's what you have to learn. We live in a world that cycles very rapidly, and individuals tend to think what their own general environment teaches them to think, and it isn't all that great. And the people that do take advantage of it, the gentleman you speak about, Kings Point, that's a tremendous education, and you come out with an option of being either a merchant marine officer or a naval officer, and you have those options. So there's something good that comes out of almost anything. And I think I did. I went through 7 schools to get to high school. Grew up in the inner city, was stabbed twice before I was old enough to drive a car. I think World War II saved my title and my rear end.
You know, Mr. Yoho, I agree with you totally. I think the experiences we get in the military actually prepare us probably better for life than all the education, the book learning education that is out there. I think the camaraderie you mentioned, and that's critical, because you live and die with your brother or sister. But it's also the fact that you learn to control your emotions. You learn to control your mind. I'm not going to say you control fear, that you live without fear, because it's scary as all get out. But you learn to control your reaction to that fear. And I'm blessed. I trained as a critical care nurse in the military. And when I came off active duty in 1977, I then had the skills to walk into any intensive care unit or ER in this country. And that is just something that you don't get right out of school in any other way. And anybody tells you you're ready to do that when you're a brand new grad, don't know what they're talking about. But I think the big thing is you learn that you can handle almost anything that life throws at you.
Well, you all are not very talkative people. I figured I was going to be a lot of action here tonight. I want you to know we all have something in common. We all have that commonality. And I'd like to hear your story as well.
I would too.
It struck me talking about what one learns. When I think that when you get out of school, as Sherry and anyone who's gone through and then ended up in the Merchant Marine or the Navy on the bridge of a ship, you're 21 years old typically. You're on the 8 to 12 watch as a junior third mate in most Merchant Marine jobs, or at least that's the way it was in the old days. And you're there with one able seaman with you. You're in command, literally, of a monster ship tearing along through the ocean at 17 knots in the case of a C2, a C3, or a Victory. And you're absolutely responsible until you call the captain if you've got a problem. You're responsible for the operation of this monster ship. In the old days, we carried 48 people in the crew. If you were one of the Grace Line ships, you'd have as many as 12 or even 20 passengers on some of them. And to think that a 21-year-old right out of school suddenly finds himself in a position like that, it's a very sobering and very confidence building sort of experience. I think it's something that in few other industries, perhaps in aviation, of course, but it strikes me that it's a great character building experience.
Yes, I'll agree. 21 years old, and I know I felt the same way when I took command. I just turned 31, and I had to trust that I knew the training that I received was what I had to rely on, and I learned that respect. You have to have respect for everybody on board. Doesn't matter what rank they are. If they're doing their job the way they're expected to do their job, respect is required and goes a very long way. I sailed with a crew, including myself, of 24. But same thing, their mates stood that 8 to 12 and then 20 to 2400. Unless they called the captain, they were in charge with one other AB with them. I learned to keep my own best interests at heart with every decision made, because I was the one that was in control of that destiny and looked out for myself the most. I've learned that from the old academy, pick up your feet when you go through that threshold, keep your hands out of the door jams. Simple little things that we took for granted at the school. Even today, when I'm getting off a ship or getting on and a door closes behind me and it slams so hard, you think, if my hand was in there, I was going to lose those fingers. And my daughter also went to Maine Maritime Academy and graduated in 2016. And every so often my brain says, oh, I got to remind her not to. And I don't have to remind her. She had her training just like I did, and she knows exactly what to do and not to do. And I've also learned to not only respect my shipmates, but respect Mother Nature, because she can turn a rather good day into a bad day very quickly.
Sherry, could I ask, in my day, of course, there were no women in the American Merchant Marine at all. We certainly had none at the academies or on our ships. And recently, of course, at the age of 94, I've not been working on ships. We do a fair amount of traveling, but the troubles we've heard about at the academies, at Kings Point specifically, which is the one I'm in touch with, do you think this is a continuing major problem, the difficulties that some of the schools have had protecting female cadets from the unpleasant encounters that they've had? Or is this something that you think with time will disappear naturally? I was pleased to hear that one of our major cruise ships here in Miami, not an American one, unfortunately, but is now under the command of a female captain. You probably know which ship it is. I can't recall, but it's one of the world's largest vessels. But is this something that you think that will just gradually disappear, or is it going to take a lot more legislation and oversight?
I think it will wane as we get rid of what I would call the good old boy syndrome, to just, for lack of a better term. I fortunately did not have any poor experiences at the academy. I did have a poor experience in my first 2 weeks, but I did on board as third mate. But I did have a very strong captain who was very young. He was 30. And we handled it in a way where I was worried about me getting a poor reputation for going after a very seasoned crew member who was 3 times my age, who was supposedly a very, very good pumpman within the company. And I felt like if I went after a sexual assault and had him fired, it would really damage my reputation. So we went a different avenue, and it worked well in our situation. And it actually took a little convincing. I had to convince the captain to see it my way, and it worked out fine. I'm still amazed today that when I get on a ship that I work 2-week rotations, and in that 2 weeks, I'm still going to get at least twice in that 2 weeks that they've never seen a female pilot before. And I thought that I would never hear that by the end of my career, and yet I still do. I think the fact that it's not going to be tolerated by both the younger generation of male and female, that it will hopefully go away a little bit more on its own than it has in the past.
Okay, moving on. The next question is, what did your experiences while serving teach you that you'd want others to know? For example, your children or grandchildren.
I guess since I'm still unmuted. I have 2 very young granddaughters, an 11-month-old and a soon-to-be 3-year-old. And I think I would just pass on to them that I speak to a lot of high schools. My organization, the Houston Pilots, we formed in 2002. We formed a charity organization that we do give scholarships to all 5 state schools, and we do give a scholarship to Kings Point because we know that even though the tuition is covered, that sometimes they can't cover their books or they can't cover gas to get home. So I think my bottom line of what I've learned is to give back to the community, to my academy. I've formed an endowment with my daughter so that the income made off of the endowment can provide scholarships for future students that want to go. I do speak to, we've actually gone into the middle schools now because we're not captured at the high school level. We've already missed the opportunity for the most part. So we're into the middles and the junior highs trying to educate the student population of what is out there. So for me, I like to teach to give back in any way, shape, or form. If it's not a financial give back, it should be a mentorship or go back on your school's cruise ship as mate, captain, whatever, if you can afford the time to volunteer to do that. That's my whole take with give back and educate those that are following.
So, okay. All right. So for experiences while serving, honestly, it all comes down to war sucks and nobody wants to go. So for my children, if they don't have to serve, my own personal choice is I wouldn't have them serve. because there's a lot of things that happen at war that does not happen in the stateside. You know, like seeing your friends get blown up or etc. There's a million different scenarios that can be thrown out there. But try to, I don't know, teach them the best you can. Stay out of the military, personally. Not that I'm trying to keep people out of the military by any means, but yep.
David, I think that's interesting that you said you keep your children want to keep your children out of the military because in stateside they don't get blown up. You don't see their buddies get shot or blown up. You obviously haven't lived in the inner city. And to be very honest, I just moved to the UP from Chicago, and we call it Shit-Chicago for a reason. My husband was born and raised there, and a day didn't go by that we didn't have at least 10 shootings, 5 carjackings, and other various crimes. So I think the thing I'd want my children, if I had children, and I don't, I'm not blessed that way, but I have nieces and nephews. And I think the thing I want them to know is that you're right. War is not pretty. War is not a great thing. But as long as there are humans in this world, there's going to be war. There's going to be disagreements. People are going to want land that isn't theirs. And people will have to fight for it. And from my point of view as a nurse, as long as men and women are willing to fight for the principles that they believe in, my job as a nurse or as a healthcare professional is to care for those men and women. Did I enjoy going to war? No. Did I enjoy having to fire? When my starboard door gunner got shot, did I enjoy having to get up there and fire back? No. But it was a choice of me or them, and my patients or them. And you make hard choices in a time of war. But as far as serving in the military, I think it is one of the most honorable things and selfless things a human being can do when you consider that only less than 1% or 1% of the United States population has served. 1% out of over 300 million people. That says something.
I would like to touch on what you just finished saying about women in the military. And from my era, just take something like the planes were made in Detroit. Now the plane is ready to be transported. It was flown to its next place to be armed. Women flew those planes. There were 1,000 women recruited under something called WASP, W-A-S-P. And you're not going to see them mentioned in the headlines, and you don't see them get the gratifications because they were civilians. 39 of them died. Now, think of the era when they did what they did, 1942, 1943, 1944. And so to serve and know that you did well is, in my opinion, a treat unto itself. If you're waiting for somebody to come up and slap you on the back and say you did a great job, it ain't going to happen. If there wasn't pressure put on the United States government, the WASP would have never been recognized. And let me say a thing about being in the service in terms. One thing you learn, I say, instant maturity. You're no longer a boy when I'm 15, 16, 17, 18 years of age when you go into a service environment, you're an adult and you're treated like an adult. You can't cry for mommy. You go on watches and you're 4 on, 8 off, and you never get the cycle of the development of rest. And we give up a lot. But I will tell you that I believe in today's society, where youth of society does not have respect for realism, they have no respect for authority, and they have no respect for other human beings in terms of being senior citizens or what have you. And I believe in what I do have in common with all of you who speak of your time in your service. You were forced to live within certain, not only in the environment, but in your sector of knowledge. You were taught something that you might not have gotten at that age. When the war ended, I was only 17 years of age, 4 days later. And I came home a very mature guy in some ways, which are not good about that, but you probably have an idea what I'm talking about. But you get a respect for authority, because when you're in that environment, you're dependent on the others around you as well. I believe we do ourselves a favor if we did require a 17-year-old who doesn't want to go to college or whatnot, let him go in the military. Find a way to get whatever it is can be taught in terms of discipline and respect for life for others. Sorry, I made a speech.
Well, Dave, the very what you're saying, it strikes me that a normal teenager nowadays suddenly faced with having to keep their pockets buttoned at one of the academies or get a 5 demerit penalty would be something that most kids nowadays wouldn't relish or understand at all. But I think from the very beginning, going through Maine or to Kings Point or Massachusetts or any of the schools, any of the military academies, you're immediately taught that there are rules that you must abide by or suffer the consequences. And I think that must apply whether you're at any of these schools or whether you're an enlistee who's just been drafted. It can't help but be positive in terms of life. I think one of the other things, although it's not exactly pertinent to what we're talking about, the youth, but I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that when you've got something you want accomplished, I think one of the things that I've learned from service in business more than in the military, I'm straying a bit from the point, but if you want something done, going as high up the chain of command as you can to make contact is something that I found very effective. You don't go to the second or third in command if you have the opportunity to talk to the big boss. This I've found so effective in so many cases. It's something that I guess really isn't pertinent to what we're talking about right here, but it's something that I find has worked time after time. Go to the big chief who has the authority and get a yes or a no from him right there, and you don't waste a lot of time.
I found I was able to go from ordinary seaman to master and first class pilot in New York Harbor in in 7 years. And then I learned enough to start my own marine safety engineering business, which I ran for 50 years. By that time, I was still just beginning to put on years. When I got to be 70, I was able to sail in the Gulf of Mexico in supply boats, which I had the time of my life. I had to come home to help an ailing spouse, and then wound up spending 13 years teaching at SUNY Maritime. So, and didn't have to retire until I was 97. So,
wow.
Well, I'm 99 years now, and I got just a year to go to 100. I mean, 2 more months to go to 100. So it's been an excellent life for me, and I think it teaches both males and females how to prioritize. You also have to learn how not to worry. I learned that. And if I had to do all over again, as Mr. Yoho said, I'd certainly do it.
Does anyone else have anything to add that hasn't spoke? Brandon or maybe Mr. Cooper? Before we continue?
If that's all right, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I, with my kids in the military, two of my older boys were in the Marine Corps, encouraged them to kind of decide what they thought was best for them. So they both chose the route of the military. For me, in my experience, I mean, I enjoyed it. I was 17, just turned 18. I got to see the world. I got to meet a lot of amazing people, a lot of people that I still am in contact with today. I would encourage anyone, to take a hard look at it and make that decision for them if they think it's right for them or not. Kind of going off of what Davin said, I was a little disappointed in our military, the last few years with some of the decisions that they decided to make, that they were choosing to, it just a little disappointed, to say the least. But, with that being said, my personal experience though, when, I was in, I really enjoyed it very much. A lot of lasting lifetime friendships. And like I said, I got to see the world, and it was pretty incredible, and I got paid for it. And they fed me every day. I mean, I had 3 meals a day, and I ate like crazy. And it was just the cooks on the ship, man, you walk down and there's like a buffet of food, and there's pancakes, and it was crazy. But anyways, at the end of the day, that's just my experience and what I had there, and I enjoyed it, and I would do it again for sure. It wasn't a career for me for sure, but it was a good stairway into learning a lot of really great things, and it gave me a lot of fantastic tools that I still use today. Discipline, a sense of order, respect, respect of others, and respect for yourself. Circling back to boot camp at the beginning of it, they do a good job of breaking it down and tearing you down into just this raw individual. And you're not really an individual more. They really teach you how to become a team player and learn how to understand and get along with all sorts of different types of personalities and people. And, it helps you, I think, long term in your personal life, just being able to, use those skill sets and those tools that they teach you and apply them in, the civilian life. And a lot of good characteristics and a lot of good things I learned from the military. So I'm grateful for that, and grateful for all the people that are here and all that have served. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I got a lot of good stuff. It's pretty much the same toolbox, right? Like I gotta reiterate the same toolbox. The year I spent in Iraq gave me a totally different perspective on the world because I've never seen the world. And then I came home, and now about once a year I take a trip somewhere else, and to relay that to my children, be like, don't be afraid to expand your mind on anything. You're gonna get that support from me, no matter what. And if you're ever in a mentor role or a leadership role, you got to make sure you're good at it, right? So and communication is key too. Like, I can't express that enough. Some people just don't know how to communicate at all. So communication, man, all the time. Being an 11 Bravo, really, you really had to learn how to talk, and you know, having these skills, like you were saying, you got to be able to pass those down. So I'm very thankful that I have those from my time in service. But yeah, I mean, I really just don't have much else. Everything was already said. He did a good job explaining it.
So I didn't mean for any of this to sound bad, all right? As far as not joining the military, all this comes down to basically I deployed as an RCP unit, which is Route Clearance Patrol. So we went out, we found bombs, and we blew stuff up. All right. After 8 years of being in the same unit, learning my job, knowing what to do, how to do it, when to do it, accurate and efficiently, you switch over, or I switched over to a new unit, and I had met mechanics that had been in for 4 years and had never even touched a vehicle. So the training system and the way that the government runs the military now compared to how it was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I'd rather have it like it was back then. At least they taught you your job. So no, I wouldn't want my children to join just because I don't feel like it would be done appropriately. So that was it.
And I believe that whatever your personal experiences are, they become your history. And that's perfectly all right. The thing that I do get concerned about is the lack of examination. If we don't study our history, this is an old adage, you're doomed to report or repeat the mistakes that were made. This is to give you one minor example. When these men were sent to prison camp, you were in the military, prison camps. Without discipline, they don't make it, they don't cut it. When you're in a convoy of 22 or 23 ships, you got to keep up, because if your ship doesn't keep up, you're left out there all by yourself. And some of the greatest tragedies, human endeavors that happened in wartime are unreported, but every one of you, young people today, can get on a phone, their own phone, and find out historically all the things that happened in the world. And if you never looked up PQ-17, which was one of the worst disasters in a convoy where we sent in 34 ships and only 11 make it. And then to study that history and to know what happened, PQ-17 was a convoy that left for Russia only 7 months into the war. What happened in Bari, Italy, the greatest disaster in naval history during the war, not repeated, where there was one ship in the harbor in Bari, Italy, and it was blown up because it had 100 tons of mustard gas on that ship. That's the opportunity for everyone to learn and I don't like to be called a hero. That's all baloney to me. The heroes are the guys we left over there, the guys we planted, the guys that went down in ships, unmarked graves. And they're our heroes, and everybody has an opportunity to learn about them. If you don't want to read a book, then get on your horn and just do some digging, and you will find out. This is a great country, and you people are a great example of what America is all about.
We have 10 minutes left of the questions, and then we're gonna open up to a Q&A after this final question. And this final question will be, how did your service career end? And how did your time in service impact your life going forward?
I think I talked a little bit about mine. I became a critical care nurse in the military. They sent me to critical care school. I proceeded for the next 17 years after I came off active duty to be an ICU and ER nurse, at which point I realized that men and women were dying of infections. And of course, on active duty, that was in a hospital, in a war, that was one of the biggest ways they died. They didn't all die from combat casualties. They died from infections from their wounds. So I proceeded to go into infection control and infection prevention and worked the next 30 years as an infection preventionist, trying to prevent people from dying from hospital-acquired infections. So it kind of laid down my whole groundwork of everything I did for the rest of my life. That, and I eventually was able to join the American Legion, which I tried to do when I was on active duty. And Sherry, I thought it was interesting you being a first female pilot. I kept being told you could be auxiliary, little girl, but I kept saying, but I have two, count them, two DD 214s, enlisted and officer. And I finally made it in. And I'm so glad I did, because it lets me and my husband continue to serve our country.
My naval career almost ended prematurely. I was only in for 2 years, all of it spent in London with the US Navy. But when I was there about 6 months, the Admiral Chillingworth, who had a very nice apartment in the West End of London, gave a cocktail party, and there were only about 5 or 6 officers on his staff. And we were in his apartment one night having cocktails, and I got talking to Commander Lair, Pat Lair, my boss. And Pat had been out in Korea at the Incheon invasion 2 or 3 years before, the same day that we were there, the first day of the invasion. And I was telling Lair about the where we were anchored in the bay as 2 of the North Korean planes came in and dropped bombs on the anchored fleet. And Lair said to me, be quiet, because I was telling Lair that the American cruiser Rochester, USS Rochester, never got a shot off at these 2 little aircraft, the North Korean aircraft. They were sound asleep. The planes came in, dropped the bombs, missed the Rochester, fortunately, did a hard left turn and went over HMS Jamaica, the British cruiser that was anchored nearby, who promptly shot one of them down. And I was telling Lair that I'd been on deck watching this on our freighter at the time. And he said, be very quiet. He said, don't let the Admiral Chillingworth hear you talking about that, because he was in command of the Rochester that day. So that was almost a premature end of my naval experience. But I served 2 years, which was all they needed of us at that time. And I think the advantage of the Navy time for me was a commercial one, because it enabled me to operate quite comfortably with naval types in the business area of supplying the UK bases and so forth. There wasn't a lot of discipline, because I ended up being all by myself down in Southampton as the only officer in the UK down on the south coast taking care of the ships coming through. So the Admiral, my boss, was up in London, 90 miles, 80 miles away. But it was very, very pleasant duty. And if we didn't have a ship in, why, there was nothing to do but learn how to fly and sail and have a very good time. Naval duty could be wonderful.
All right. So my time in service ended a little bit shorter than I'd initially planned on. I had transferred, this goes back to what I had said earlier, I transferred units over to one that I had never been with before, Bridger unit. And when I got there, I had already deployed multiple times. So I know what happens on deployment, etc. And with the mechanics that they had there in the unit, none of them had ever done anything that was actually what you do for your job. So I had to talk with my commander. I said, hey, listen, these guys don't know how to run a crane. They've never turned a wrench. And you have them cleaning a mess hall? Like, no, these are mechanics. Like, I'm going to teach them what they need to do. And he didn't like what I had to say about it. So I ended up getting out with the medical. So with the check. Otherwise, service was great, teaches you core values, what to do, what you need to do, when you need to do it. I don't regret my time by any means, but it is a new military. So, all right, I'll let this, after that, I'll go to the next.
Well, as I mentioned before, my career lasted till I was 97. and I was able to have the time of my life teaching young cadets at Fort Schuyler how to use the spring line. Some of them are still contacting me now. So it couldn't have experienced a better career than I did. Thank you.
Hey, Hugh, I got to tell you, 100 years old coming up, man, that is freaking awesome, dude. Very, very cool. Hey, happy birthday to you when it's coming up. Seriously, that is freaking fantastic. I was glad when my military time got done. I enjoyed the time that I had. Enjoyed the people that I was with. I knew it wasn't going to be a long-term career for me. And I still use a lot of those tools that they taught us in the military today. And it's helped me, I think, become, part of the person that I am today. And I'm forever grateful for that, especially the experiences and the people that I got to meet and the friendships that I actually made there. They were pretty incredible. It's a different kind of friendship when you make those friends in the military. It's just a different kind of bond. I don't know. But at any rate, I was glad to be done, glad to be out and get into the civilian world and just start working and, just grinding away and just keep moving. So thank you again for all of your service, everybody, and everything that you guys have done for our country. And wish everybody continued health and just a great life for sure. So thank you.
No, I'm still currently working as a pilot. The Houston pilots, we require retirement by 68. So I have 7 more years to go if I choose to, although I will not go till I'm 68. Not sure when I will go, but it will not be at 68. But I will continue to promote educating the young children about the career paths available to them in the maritime industry. And I continue to financially support programs that educate those that want to follow that career path. We have a wonderful organization here founded 6 years ago by Ali Sedendo called Women Offshore. And they have given, I believe, $80,000 in the last 6 years to women that are trying to educate in the field. So I think that's a wonderful cause. I support them, and I'll support as much as I can while I'm still around to the education of the younger generation in this field.
Sherry, one of the things that I noticed when I was going to sea in the late 40s and during the early 50s, we had over 800 American flag ships, pardon me, in foreign trade. And of course, tremendous numbers of seamen employed in the American maritime industry. Nowadays, we're down to under 80 ships, less than 10% of what we had in the old days. And it seems to me there is no way we're going to be able, as a country, to subsidize the construction of ships to fly under the American flag, because we have the crew standards and pay rates that we have here in the States, the cost of building in the States. As a pilot, you must be noticing more than most the lack of foreign flag vessels coming in and out of the ports that you've been servicing. Does that strike you as being so evident, and is it more and more apparent that the American flag is just disappearing from the oceans?
Vessels are diminishing. I think what we're finding, we call it the new American merchant fleet, is the integrated tug and barges that look like a ship and they run like a ship, but they're staffed or manned like a tug and barge. There's less crew on board, which makes it financially easier on the companies running them. But we need to keep that Jones Act in effect if we want to be able to keep our fleet available, especially in wartime or support of such.
The type of ship you're talking about, the barge, are they mostly coastwise, coastal vessels?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now, you do have companies building, Crowley, they have a lot of integrated tug and barges, but they've got 8 Jones Act tankers as well. So they could go foreign if necessary. They're not just coastwise. They're not built to be just coastwise. But yes, the American merchant fleet is dwindling.
We're going to become more and more reliant in the case of emergency, I think, on fleets from Denmark, from Hong Kong, from Japan, from Korea. If there are emergencies in places like Taiwan or South Korea or areas where we have to immediately supply, because we just don't have the numbers that we had back 70 years ago.
Correct. Yeah.
At the risk of giving a political observation, military people, seamen, participates as Army nurses, the WASP. We aren't the people who start the wars. The wars are started by politicians. And this is not a rap on politicians. They're human beings, and they cannot know what they do not know. And someone is going to be making a rule of law or setting a standard by which they want you to operate. And yet, in a wartime area, it is the non-conformity that you take to build in conformity. And the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, the largest invasion that the world has ever seen. The 75th anniversary, my wife and I were invited there as guests to Omaha Beach and to Normandy Cemetery, at the end of which, by the way, when they brought the flag down, I received that flag. But I stood at the foot of Pont de Hoc. That's, if you've ever been over there, that's a cliff that runs straight up in the air. And heard the story of the 235 men that were tested to climb up the face of it. They shot grappling hooks up. And the Germans were on the top shooting down. And one by one, the men fall off the ropes. And one by one, they're replaced by another guy. And the 235 that started out end up, at the end of the day, less than 90 were fit for combat. That's how many men were killed. And I believe there's a historic lesson there that we should be learning every day about warfare. We don't treat our returning veterans very well, largely because we don't have a clue. The people that make the laws do not have a clue as to what it means. And wherever you served, if you were an Army nurse, or if you're in the bowels of a ship, or if you're in the front line, a machine gun position, or unloading bombs, wherever it is, you were isolated from the human tasks that other people, non-combatants and non-participants, are experiencing. Take it from me, it is a learning experience. Every one of you, what you emote is emoting something that helped you grow intellectually and get over all the things that you have seen or heard about in warfare, and understand that you're back here working in a world where we are a minority. And if you want to be good, feel good about yourself. If you want to be great, feel good about yourself. If you want to be wealthy, figure out how to do it and be good to yourself. Because it was a great experience being there. And the greatest learning experience you have is taking care of yourself and doing what's right for you, society, and your own best interests. Sorry I made a speech.
Would anyone else like to go before we move on?
If not, I just want to thank all of the panelists for, sharing their experiences. A lot of them seemed very personal. And, as the Civics Corps, we do want to thank you and, appreciate the time that you have given us. For the remainder of the time, we do open up questions to the audience. Please use the raise hand feature and remain muted until called upon. Once again, keep the discussion respectful. Thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Uh, Mr. Yoho, my name's David Schaff, another Dave, and I was in the Navy from 1952 to 55. And most of that time was on a destroyer. And we did a lot of refueling at sea. It was quite an experience. We had one captain who was not the best seaman, and he did bump the oiler, and there's still a dent in the destroyer, and probably one in the oiler too from that. There are other stories I could tell you, but I thought that would lighten up a little bit this program.
Well, thank you. And I will answer you. I can't stand silence for too long. I don't get paid by the word. I get paid to make a speech, but I can't stand silence. So I'd like to ask somebody that hasn't spoken up. If you're an observer here, if you're a student, what did you extrapolate from what you heard here tonight? You heard some great stories, and people open up their veins a little bit to talk about the occasions on which they served. What was your learning experience here tonight?
We do have a question from Don Fennessy.
Yes, my name is Don Fennessy. My dad, Don Fennessy, was in the Merchant Marine. He was Kings Point class of January 1944. He was torpedoed on the James Smith off the coast of Brazil in March of 1943 on his cadet cruise when he was a deck cadet. During or following his graduation from Kings Point, he served on the SS Wagon Box, which I believe was a T2 tanker, in the Atlantic, doing convoys to Europe. And then he switched over to the Palo Alto, which was a T2 tanker in the Pacific. Starting in August 1945, just as the war was ending, he signed on as chief engineer of the SS Ada Rehan, which made an extraordinary 11-month around the world 1.25 times without stopping in the United States. They had some crazy adventures, and I wondered if any of you senior gentlemen ever crossed paths with him or his ships. And by the way, he died at age 100.5 3 years ago. His favorite shirt was his Kings Point sweatshirt.
I'm sorry to say you didn't meet him, but I certainly would like to.
Yeah, that wasn't easy to do.
Mr. Hennessy, I always found, pardon me, in the old days, that tankers would berth in sort of out of the way spots so that, walking from the docks in Rio into town, which was easy in the old days, from the cargo docks, you'd never see a tanker. They had them parked somewhere way out of harm's way in case they blew up or had fires or something like that. So tanker men, we always found, were sort of strange beings that we didn't didn't run into very often. I don't know if anybody else had the same experience.
When he was third assistant engineer on the wagon box, he said he met a Swedish mariner. And my dad naively remarks that, boy, if we get hit on the tanker, we're going to need lifeboats. And the Swedish guy says, if you get hit in this thing, you're going to need a parachute.
My dad was on a convoy going into the Mediterranean at the time of the North African invasion. And he said that one of the tankers in their convoy was hit one night. And he said from thousands of yards away, they had pieces of the tanker crew bodies dropping on the deck of the Liberty ship that my dad was on. So obviously there was nothing left if a tanker got torpedoed in the wrong place.
When his ship, the James Smith, was torpedoed, it hit the number 5 hold. It was empty. The ship was traveling in ballast. And then because it was in the tropics, men were sleeping on top of the cargo hatches. Torpedo hit, there's no cargo to absorb any of the explosive force, and just blew the hatch covers off. They abandoned ship in the middle of the night, and it didn't sink. And then the next morning, they went back on the ship, and Dad was assigned to help piece together the remains and give them a quick burial at sea. Pretty sobering for a kid that's 22 years old.
Incidentally, what is being recited there, Don is reciting the Kings Point Academy, being the Merchant Marine Academy, and when you graduated, you had you could be an ensign in the Navy, or you could be an ensign in the U.S. Maritime Service. But an interesting thing, the cadets that studied there didn't do their full course of learning there and then get their commission. They had to go to sea first. So they were put on ships as cadets. And then after 6 months on the ship, you came back and you did about another 3 months and got your commission. But a number, it's about 145 of those cadets never got back home because the ships were sunk. And the tragedy of being in the Merchant Marine at that time is that they were sinking ships so rapidly, and the men went down with the ships frequently, that they couldn't find enough men. And that's why, for the first time in American history, they conscripted 16-year-olds to go on those ships and take their place in the adult world. And the other thing about this refueling of the ships, it was a pretty primitive thing at the time. And you mentioned a Swedish guy. We had a guy of Swedish origin who used to go up. They would pull him up on a rope, and he was sitting. I forget what they call that, but he would be a bosun's chair. They'd pull him up in the air, and they would have a guy on the other side, and they would guard these 2 hoses and bring the hoses together so they could be clamped. One from the ship being refueled, one from the ship doing the fueling. And then the ships had to sail for an interim period until that refueling was up. But that guy who went up there on either side, when these hoses come together and they force them together, one guy has to slip these bolts in there to bolt it for that period of time. You never hear much about it, but somebody had to do it. And what he said, it wasn't an attractive life. You didn't get into the great ports of call when you were on a tanker.
Thanks, Mr. Yoho. We do have another question from Doreen, and we only have a few more minutes left on our Q&A time before we need to turn to closing statements and a message from Jan Lipinski. So Doreen, please feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, so it's really not a question. I just really want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for including our U.S. Merchant Marine in the discussion with our military, because the U.S. Merchant Marine serves in peace and war. They are not part of the military, and yet the military relies upon them tremendously. So I'm with the Apostleship of the Sea of the United States of America. We're part of the port ministry that reaches out to our U.S. merchant mariners and to all foreign mariners. I'm also happy to say I serve as co-president for WISTA here in the Texas chapter of WISTA USA. And Sherry Hickman is one of our former co-presidents. So it's great to see Ms. Hickman on here. WISTA is the Women's International Shipping and Trading Association. Last week, with the Apostleship of the Sea, we were very pleased to have Burley Smith with us for an AOS USA conference on board a sister ship of the Meredith Victory in Tampa. And this man is just a remarkable piece of history. And I am so glad that you reached out to him for him to be able to share his knowledge with you. These are very important events to hold. All of our military people need to be recognized for all that they do. And with our U.S. Merchant Marine, we really need to be promoting out the important jobs that are there. I am in Port Arthur, Texas, which when the refineries went, south during the 1980s, it was the U.S. Merchant Marine that really kept our whole community afloat. There are fantastic living wage jobs in the Merchant Marine community, and not all of those jobs require being at sea. For every job that's at sea, there are about 95 jobs on land that are created by that. And so I just want to commend you all for putting a spotlight on our U.S. Merchant Marine and for holding this event this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Doreen. And thank you for everyone who's here tonight, speakers, panelists, of course, our audience. We really appreciate you attending the second annual Veteran Speak hosted by the Bay College branch of the Civics Corps. I'm Dr. June Cleese, the group's advisor. Tonight's event brought together veterans of different generations who, in various capacities, have served our country in peace and in war, as the Merchant Marine motto highlights. The stories we heard emphasize the importance of individual valor, sacrifice, teamwork, communication, and respect, while also revealing how powerful our shared bonds as Americans are in overcoming obstacles, challenges, and forces seeking to tear us apart. Indeed, if not for the cooperation and collaboration of our military branches and the Merchant Marine, the United States would not have been able to defend our republic's freedom from the tyrannical forces that historically destroyed lives and sought to end liberty and justice itself. That cooperation remains important to our national security to this day. Storytelling events like this can remind us of how much we have in common, despite actual perceived or manufactured differences, past or present. Studies show that most Americans believe that intergenerational experiences are important in building unity and in problem-solving efforts. Indeed, a majority of Americans crave opportunities to listen and learn from people of different generations to forge a better future together. Additionally, research shows that it's important for veterans to share their experiences as they feel comfortable. It helps other veterans in their well-being to know that they're not alone and that they're part of a multi-generational community of those who answered the call to serve and protect our republic. For example, many of our veterans and our audience members may like to know that in our audience tonight is Mr. Reynolds Tomter of Pigeon Falls, Wisconsin. At 106.5 years old, he may be the oldest war veteran in attendance tonight. After training at Sheepshead Bay, New York, he served in the U.S. Merchant Marine during World War II, crossing the Atlantic several times to supply our troops fighting fascism in Europe. For this service, Mr. Tomter was recognized with a Gold Medal of Honor in August of 2022. Thank you, Mr. Tomter, for your service and for attending in the audience tonight. Before I close continue to close my remarks for the evening, one of our panelists, Jan Lipinski, the UP Membership Director for the American Legion, would like to share a bit about the Legion's efforts on behalf of veterans and those in service. Jan?
Thank you, June. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the American Legion. I like to say it's probably one of the best kept secrets for veterans out there. We don't do a great job of advertising because we don't put a lot of money into advertising. Any funds that come to the American Legion go to the veteran in the way of donations. We do pay our dues. And I like to say for less than 15 cents a day, you too can be a member of the American Legion. I don't know if you realize, but that's really not a lot of money. We're built on 4 pillars. First is Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation. From Abraham Lincoln, to care for those who have borne the battle and to care for women and children. So our second pillar is children and youth. Our third pillar is Americanism, and we promote patriotic beliefs through various ways. I don't know how many of you are aware that the American Legion sponsors baseball, and that the majority of professional baseball players actually got their start through American Legion baseball. We also promote national security. That's our fourth pillar. And I think that's rather obvious, something we would build on. We are a nonpartisan organization. We promote no political candidate. We take no sides during political campaigns. Excuse me. We wrote the original GI Bill post World War II. And 9/11, we rewrote the GI Bill and submitted it to Congress, which expanded the educational benefits to go to spouses and children of veterans. We are a large group, 4 million in our families, and the family encompasses not only the American Legion, but the American Legion Auxiliary, the Sons of the American Legion, who are descendants of prior service members, male descendants of prior service members. And we have the Legion Riders, who do a great service every year and go for something called the Legacy Ride. Right before our national convention, they go through at least 5 different states, encompassing well over 1,200 miles a year, raising funds. And over the last 10 years, they have raised over $20 million to provide scholarship funds for 9/11, post 9/11 casualties and those severely wounded, like with traumatic head injuries. If they were members of the American Legion, we guarantee their children post-high school education, be that trade school or college. We assist in other issues. We have a national emergency fund for our members that, say your home is damaged in a tornado or a hurricane. We provide funds to help you through that time. We also have, through our Children and Youth Foundation, have what we call the temporary financial assistance. Again, to help families who are financially destitute, something comes up, major hospitalizations, loss of work. We will help you with, and these are grant funds, by the way. They are not expected to be repaid. But I think the biggest thing that I find is our community service. I think when you're in a small town especially, you will find that the American Legion post is the heart of the town. They very often are where all the weddings, all the parties happen, but they also give back. I know our post in Menominee, we did a Veterans Day breakfast, and you didn't have to be a member of the post, you just had to be a veteran to get a free meal. We do participate in parades, we sponsor baseball. We just, made ourselves available for community service. They needed, we had our suicide prevention program for the whole community, and it was housed out of the American Legion. It was a walk, and we were able to raise over $20,000 in about 3 hours. So that's one of the biggest things. The American Legion is not just about war stories and old men sitting and drinking beer, cheap beer at the bar. It is about community service. It is about continuing to serve our country. It is about camaraderie and finding shared experiences and sharing those experiences so you can realize you are not alone. The American Legion has service officers throughout this country who help you with VA claims. Right now, if you see all these ads on television, oh, Camp Lejeune, pay, come to us, we'll file your claims for you. They don't tell you that when you get your claim money, they're going to take part of that. In fact, they're going to take the majority of that. The American Legion will never charge you to help you with your claims. Any money donated, I think I mentioned, 100% of it goes to our programs. We have Operation Comfort Warrior, which is similar to Wounded Warrior. However, it is administered by members of the American Legion staff that are paid for out of our dues. So any money donated to Operation Comfort Warrior goes to the program, goes to the veteran, unlike the other programs out there. We have insurance programs that are available that just by being a member of the American Legion, you are automatically eligible for a $1,000 accidental death and dismemberment insurance. To me, that's very important because very often young people coming out don't even think about insurances. And if you're doing Legion business, it automatically bumps to $5,000. So these are just some of the things that I feel are benefits to being in the American Legion. And gentlemen, if you are descendants of a veteran, grandfather, father, you are eligible to be a son of the American Legion. If you're a spouse of a veteran, you are eligible to be a member of our auxiliary, male or female. And anybody in those 3 Legion families be Legion Riders. Thank you for the opportunity to share the purpose of the American Legion with you, and I hope to see you join our family.
Thank you so much, Jen. In addition to our panelists and attendees, I'd like to thank the students, staff, faculty, and administration of Bay College, particularly our new president, Dr. Narita Hughes, Drs. Amy Redinger and Jessica Van Sloten, Mr. Dave Schaff, Mr. Brian Schaefer, Mr. Sean Curtin, Ms. Kaylee Hubert, and Ms. Brooke Joraz. The support and encouragement received from the college in making tonight a success has been invaluable. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the Collaborative for Compassionate Civic Engagement, Mr. Tony Acevedo, Dr. Deanna Beachley, and Dr. Sandra Cosgrove, Ms. Patricia Clay, and Ms. Heather Kreidler, who serve as the National Advisory Board of the Civics Corps Experience. Gratitude is also extended to Ms. Deb Netto of the Great Lakes Peace Center and Dr. Alice Mayer and Mr. Matt Bugatti of Waging Dialogue. Additionally, it cannot be understated how honored the Civics Corps is to be partnered with the American Legion and the American Merchant Marine veterans for this annual event. And we do look forward to hoping to have another one next year for our 3rd annual. So on behalf of our amazing Civics Corps students and myself, it's been an honor to have you with us. We hope tonight's event has inspired you to have intergenerational conversations of your own, and that the stories told tonight serve as an encouraging reminder that as Americans, together we're still forging a more perfect union for ourselves and posterity in, as is said, this great experiment in democracy. May freedom ring. And everyone have a good evening. Thank you for attending.